Growth down, borrowing up, and now an emergency budget. My name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Money. Growth, growth, growth were to be the watchwords of this government. And yet now, it's gone. Yes, what we're seeing is the growth rate for this year being cut in half by the official watchdog of the Treasury, the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, that body that has been hailed and respected so much by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Well, it's clearly not giving her the same respect back, as clearly today we are seeing half the rate of growth than was previously thought, down from 2% to 1%. It might not seem like a lot, but if you think about the law of small numbers, what this really means is we're seeing half as much extra goods and services in the economy than was thought. This compounds over time and really affects the decisions that the Chancellor can make. It affects how much money can be spent and indeed how much more money needs to be raised through tax. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing what the Tories are describing as an emergency budget as soon as next week. Of course, when the Chancellor Rachel Reeves became Chancellor, she was saying she wanted to return the Chancellery to stability, to say that there should only be one major fiscal event from the Treasury each year. Already it seems that has been broken. That promise of stability, of returning to just one major fiscal event from that dispatch box, well, clearly it's not been a full year since the last one, and already looking forward to Wednesday, this fiscal event, this OBR update, or if you're being pejorative, this emergency budget. What could it contain? Well, clearly there are worries, there are fears this might be further revenue raising measures. What does that mean? More tax rises. More than the 40 billion tax rises that we saw in Rachel Reeves' last budget. At the time of that budget, they were saying that this would be getting the country back on a firm footing, the only major tax raising budget in this parliament. After that, the mission would be growth, growth, growth. And yet, that hasn't been the case. We've seen growth forecasts fall, not rise. We've seen the cost of borrowing go up, not down. And we've seen the amount of borrowing almost twice as much in February this year than was expected. It was expected to be around £6 billion in February. That was the forecast. And yet now we learn it's closer to £11 billion. This is not funny money. This is serious stuff. But why is it that growth is so much lower? Why is it that receipts are so much lower? Why is it that the country has clearly taken not the course that was first thought of by the Chancellor herself? One of the concerns is that the amount of tax that was raised in that first budget has a bigger negative impact on the economy than was first thought. The cost of hiring individuals, particularly low salaried individuals, has risen precipitously through the national insurance tax rise. This more than £20 billion of extra taxes placed on businesses if they wish to hire people. Clearly that has a drag effect, not only on the number of people that can be hired, but frankly on the amount that those people can be paid. And if people in low wages can't get those pay rises because the money that was reserved for pay rises is now going into the Treasury's coffers instead, well, that's less money that low-paid people can go out and spend in the economy themselves. That's a knock to what's known as the multiplier effect, when people go out and spend money and that money itself can then be spent again and again and again. It can be multiplied and counted more than once. It can contribute to that economic growth that this country is so seeking. But clearly, that tax rise has had a negative impact on what growth might be. And the Office for Budget Responsibility did say at the time that tax rise would hit growth.
Us blokes hate talking about a little thinning up top, and many of us settle with that balding look, but that wasn't for me, and that's why I went to Elite Hair, the world's leading hair loss clinic, and now I've had over 4,000 new hairs added to this barnet, and very soon I'm going to be rocking some brand new flowing locks, and you can too. So how does it work? Step 1, I sent the team a set of photos of my head. Step 2, I then spoke to one of the Elite Hair staff who looked through my photo submissions and worked out a treatment plan for me. Step 3, Elite Hair then organised accommodation and the treatment. I was at their state-of-the-art treatment centre in Istanbul, and their incredibly kind staff took me through the process, and before I knew it, I was in surgery. Elite Hair and their leading medical experts have specialised in pain-free treatments using the sleep deep method, and they really mean that. I felt incredibly relaxed the whole time, and I haven't felt any pain since. Check out Elite Hair using the link in the description. When you do, Elite Hair will provide you with a free personalised hair analysis. Then you'll join over 100,000 happy patients. Hit that link and start your hair growth journey like I did today.
But there's been more too. Of course, the interest rate decision that we saw this week has held rates at a relatively high rate, 4.5%. That's not as quick as the initial estimates of falling interest rates would have been. Why? Well, one of the reasons is that inflation has been higher than expected. It's been ticking up under this government rather than ticking down. Why is that? Well, there were tens of billions of pounds extra borrowing in that initial budget under this government. Yes, Rachel Reeves changed the debt rule. It counted the assets that the British government holds in a different way, changing that balance sheet calculation and allowing for up to £50 billion in extra borrowing. But we all know what happens when the government borrows more than it takes in tax. That means that there's more money sloshing around the system. Where does that money come from? It's printed. And how is that money spent? Well, when there's more money chasing the same number of goods and services, we can all see the logical implication of that. It doesn't expand the number of goods and services to meet the money. No, the money just meets those goods and services, meaning that those goods and services cost more money. Too much money chasing too few goods. That leads to inflation. So what have we seen? Not only higher taxes by tens of billions of pounds, but also higher borrowing by tens of billions of pounds, and now lower growth. Half as much growth in the coming year than was first expected by the Office for Budget Responsibility. This has material impacts, not just for the future plans of this government, not just for the tax rates that you and I may have to pay, but also for the amount of money that the government can spend on things like benefits, on things like pensions. We've already seen the winter fuel allowance famously cut. We've seen disability benefits have the axe taken to them too, with £5 billion of cuts coming there. But there are now speculations that the fiscal drag, that secret, sneaky tax rise that all of us have had to face really since the pandemic, that could be extended further. What do I mean by that? The thresholds at which we pay income tax, despite our salaries generally rising, despite inflation definitely rising, those income tax thresholds remaining at the same rate, meaning that more and more people are surreptitiously dragged into higher tax brackets. We have never in the history of this country had so many people paying the absolute top rate of tax as we do today. And similarly, the next step down, we have never had more people paying the 40p in the pound rate. And it goes on and on. This is clearly what the government has been intending to do behind the scenes over the last few years. The question now is, how many more years will this fiscal drag on? How much longer will people be paying a higher rate of tax than they would have been if they had a real terms pay increase and a real terms tax threshold increase to boot? Well, clearly some big decisions there from the Chancellor, and further to that, what sort of investment may now be cut? We've seen how tax rises may continue, these stealth tax rises, this fiscal drag may drag on for years more than expected. We've seen where cuts are falling with regard to pensions and with regard to those who receive disability benefits. But there are now questions in terms of what the government may be spending on this critical national infrastructure. infrastructure? Where might new road or rail projects be cut back? Where might we see less being spent on the environment around us? And we all know that that contributes to a lack of growth too. Rachel Reeves herself has said so time and time again, that we need to have greater road and rail infrastructure, that we need to get building, that we need more homes. All of these things, of course, contribute to growth. But if we're cutting back on the amount that we're investing in this physical infrastructure, well, then we're cutting back on growth too. And you can see how this becomes a negative spiral. Higher taxes, higher borrowing, less investment, all of these things ticking together to push down the economic potential of this country. And that's before we come on to energy, because we have seen energy prices rising and rising. This is a concerning time for anyone trying to keep the lights on, for anyone trying to pay those energy bills. The government, when it came in, promised that energy bills would fall by £300 per household, thanks to state investment in Great British Energy, the renewable energy company that doesn't actually generate any energy. And yet, what have we seen in the first 8 months of this government? Nothing but upward pressure on prices. Energy costing more, not costing less. Now, the government says that its big plan to build more solar farms, more wind farms, and yes, in time, more nuclear too, will bring down the costs. But what they don't say is that whilst it's true that a wind farm is technically the cheapest form of energy to produce, it doesn't produce that energy all the time. What does that mean? That for every wind farm that we build, we have to build a backup source of generation too. And what is that backup source of generation that can easily be switched on and off? It's gas. Yes, for every wind farm that has to be constructed, we need, in effect, some gas power too. So what does that mean? That we shouldn't only count the amount that we're spending on the wind farms or the solar farms, because that's not the full picture. To add to that, we also need to include the infrastructure, the transmission towers, the substations, and yes, the backup power too. When you include the spending that is necessary on all of these other elements, what happens? Well, wind and solar doesn't look so cheap after all. To get wind and solar integrated into the grid, fully on with its backup, with its transmission, with those pylons across the countryside, well, suddenly it looks more and more and more expensive. And this is the real problem here, that the government is almost telling itself a lie when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to energy. This isn't going to make things cheaper unless there is some miraculous technological breakthrough in terms of battery storage or indeed in terms of getting the price of nuclear power lower. Ultimately, there is a reason why the price of energy in this country is set on gas, and that's for every renewable energy source that is built, you need gas backup. And so what's the government's policy when it comes to gas? Don't extract it. Yes, we sit on a wealth of natural gas, particularly onshore, only in the last few months, and yet another enormous repository of shale gas has been found in Lincolnshire. It's worth potentially tens of billions of pounds, and yet government policy is don't touch it. Leave it in the ground. The government has another policy too for North Sea oil and gas. No new exploration. No further exploration beyond the licenses granted under the previous government. This is almost boggling of the mind when you look at not only countries like Russia or the Middle East, not only the dictatorships of the world that of course are prodigiously extracting more oil and gas as fast as they can, but also democracies. Look at countries like Norway. Look at countries like Canada, like the United States of America. They're not stopping gas exploration. They know that more gas is critical, not just to keeping the lights on and the bills down, but also to a just transition. It's not impossible to have gas and net zero. In fact, the only way that you're going to, in any way that is socially acceptable, last the next couple of decades until we get to 2050, is with more gas. And yet, almost uniquely, the British government is saying no further explanation, no further onshore drilling, a moratorium on shale gas extraction on land. In fact, concreting up wells too. It's hard to see how the UK can have a growing economy with such expensive energy. By some measures, the most expensive energy of any country, of any developed country on the planet. This is a serious position to be in. We have high energy costs, high tax, high borrowing, and low growth. These things are not separate. They all fit together. It's all part of the same puzzle. To some extent, the United Kingdom has the worst of both worlds when it comes to the advice that we give to developing countries. What do I mean by that? When we go to sub-Saharan Africa, we will tell these countries, what you need is reliable energy and infrastructure. What do we do in this country? We have unreliable energy and expensive infrastructure. The government has been trying to build a tunnel called the Lower Thames Crossing for the best part of the last decade. There hasn't been a single spade in the ground to dig that tunnel yet, and yet it has already cost hundreds of millions of pounds in paperwork. We've spent more on the planning application for the Lower Thames Crossing than Norway spent actually completing the longest underground tunnel in the world. Yes, that's the position that we've found ourselves in. Not only do we have expensive energy, but when we try and build a road or a railway or a tunnel, we face an enormous amount of environmental red tape, of judicial review, of the length of impact statements that would not easily be readable by one person in one lifetime. Rewrite more than the entire works of Shakespeare just to get a single infrastructure project approved. How is this sustainable for this country? It's clear that when there is this emergency budget, or indeed economic update, whichever version of that you wish to call it, next week, there will need to be a comprehensive strategy for growth, because this country is clearly falling behind. What has been tried so far has not been working. The proof is in the numbers. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and it doesn't taste terribly good. No, we're not seeing the growth that we wanted to see. We're not seeing the amount of tax revenue that the government had expected. Indeed, when we look at the number of millionaires in this country, it's going down, not up. People are leaving this country to escape the high taxes. And when you look at the non-domiciled high net worth individuals, those billionaires who based themselves in the UK, well, since that status was abolished by the Treasury, what's happened? Well, those non-domiciled people have chosen to take their lives elsewhere. And that means that no tax that they pay is now paid in the United Kingdom. Under the non-dom regime, of course, earnings they made in the UK were paid in the UK. Well, if they don't live in the UK, none of that is retained. So it's clear that there have been blunders from this Chancellor. But could it be that next week is an opportunity to wipe the slate clean, to try and start again, to perhaps deliver greater security, cheaper energy, lower taxes? Well, we can but hope, because currently it looks like the taxes will be going up. The energy expense will be going up, and perhaps even the borrowing at that top level too. We'll have to wait and see. We'll keep our eyes close on it here at GBN Money. We'll be following the emergency budget, or indeed that fiscal update, what you want to call it, and we'll be giving you the explanation as soon as we have it. Every second covered here on GB News, analysing the details and what it means for you and your household finances. So remember to stay subscribed to the GBN YouTube channel for much more as we come closer to that emergency budget.